Hi everyone, I'm Ankita from NASCOM. Today we will talk about the techniques or pragmatic methods for selling to a new buyer. This is another interesting piece from our GTM series. I have with me Subhanjan Sarkar, founder Pitch.link, to share his thoughts on how to sell to a new buyer. You can ask questions anytime during the session. Subhanjan will cater to most of them during his presentation. After every few slides, he will answer a few questions. Also, do not forget to leave your feedback to help me better my future webinars. Welcome, Subhanjan, and over to you.
Thank you, Ankita. Good afternoon, friends. Thank you for making time on a Thursday afternoon. I hope all of you are safe and coping with the homeboundness that we are all in. It's indeed a pleasure and honor to be here to talk to all of you. The topic is selling to the new buyer. The question is, why are we talking of the new buyer? Okay, that needed to go through. All of us who are in sales or building a company, we are, I think, sort of exposed to the fact that the old methods of identifying and selling to a prospect are not working anymore. And the reason is that most of what we had, most of our selling process was focused on placing solutions by seeking buyers with needs. And that is extremely limiting in a way, because for that to happen, you need to be right there the very moment they become buyers. And that's actually, as we go ahead with this session, we'll discuss that the buying, when we get to know the buyer, it's pretty much at the end of a multi-step process, typically 13 to 15 steps before we get there. And the other thing is that there has been significant changes, and like the internet has disintermediated many things, whether it is commerce, whether it is music, whether it is entertainment, it has also disintermediated the whole buyer-seller dynamics. And how so? There was this information asymmetry which used to be there, where we who used to sell were always better informed than the buyers. If you look at 20-30 years back, the salesperson was a welcome visitor to a buyer's premise, because he was bringing in information. He was bringing in information about new products, new technologies, bringing information about competitors. He was pretty much the center of the whole transaction process. That has changed because the information asymmetry has now actually shifted 180 degrees from the supply side to the demand side. David Cancel, who is the founder of Drift, and they sort of came up with this idea called conversational marketing. He wrote a book on conversational marketing a couple of years back, and he says that I have watched the balance of power has shifted from supply to demand, from company to customer. The way we have been doing marketing and sales is broken. It was created for a world that no longer exists, and I pretty much agree with that. A lot of what we do today, a lot of what we use, the tools, the techniques, they were all good for the industrial era selling 30 years back. It is not relevant anymore because of this singular point, that the information asymmetry is gone, and the buyer is actually far better informed than possibly the sellers are. So the premise is that the buyer has changed, which is why we are talking of the new buyer. The buyer has changed. And before we get into the transactional and tactical issues, let us look at the high level changes that have taken place. There are three major shifts that are dominating this shift. The buyer is not buying through interruption anymore. Our traditional mode of sales is interruption based. We have to interrupt through a call, through a mail, through visits and demanding synchronous face-to-face time and so on. If we cannot interrupt, if we cannot push in our advertisement in between a popular program, if we cannot push in a pop-up or ad in the feed as it may, we cannot sell. Whether you're using LinkedIn, whether you're using Facebook, we all know there are ads which are being served in our feed which we have not asked for, and we are forced to look at that. And how many times have we just scrolled past or say hide the ad? Buyers are not buying interruption anymore. So what is actually happening? What has happened is we are in a permission economy, and we'll get into the details later. We are in a permission economy. Buyers would not engage if they are not wanting to engage. And finally, we are also entering the era of ethical analytics. A lot of the past 15 years of sales has been driven by the sales tech stack. And those of you who follow, you know, Scott Binker started the MarTech's landscape. It started 2011, had 500 odd products. Now it has 7,000. About 5 years back, Nancy Nardin and Nicholas Kochkovsky started the sales technology landscape. Each of them had their separate landscapes. And they started with like 80 products. And today it is more than 1,000. So there is this huge number of tools and technologies being thrown at us. And at the core of that is we are able to track the user's behavior. We'll talk about that later as we go. But be clear that 99% of that data is collected surreptitiously. And the world has changed post Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal. The world now has GDPR, has CCPA. 44 of the US states are considering and actually driving privacy regulations. India, most countries around the world are focused on privacy. It will not be possible to use surreptitiously tracked data. So it has to be, again, data collected through explicit permission. So as I said, interruption selling is not going to work. So what is interruption selling? As I said, it's cold calling, email spamming, telemarketing, pop-up advertising on the web, TV ads. It's not exhaustive list, obviously. It's just to give you a sense of the kind of interruptions that we possibly don't even think of. That is not working anymore. I can share some data, but before that, Ankita, would you like to check if anybody has any question up to this point?
Sure. We are good to go, Subhanjan, as of now.
Okay.
No questions.
Okay, cool. So again, I mean, these are not my own thoughts. This is what the world is reflecting. These are some stats which most of you are familiar with. The email open rate has come down to 2.28%. Even 6-7 years back, it was upwards of 8%, sometimes double digits. Today, this is where it stands, and this data will be about a year and a half old. This is what's happening to cold call rates. It's abysmal, but we are still doing it. So our response to this is driving robocalls. In fact, on this, I want to quote one other study which came out recently, which was done by Chorus. It's state of the conversational marketing data. The data is 100 and SDR needs at least 106 calls before he can set a meeting. It's worth pondering. And this is after somebody has agreed to talk. So there is no dearth of data which shows that the traditional method, which is interruption driven, is actually losing its efficacy. By the way, this is not a black and white kind of thing. I'm not trying to say it doesn't work at all. We all know something will work for some time, and it's still true that you can still, in certain industries perhaps, in certain geographies perhaps, interruption based sales will still work. But mostly, if you look at matured markets, where you are going, where you are headed, interruption based sales is unlikely to work. And there is a cost to this as well. It is not that it is only that people are not buying, so it's a loss of the sales efficiency. Our conversion rate typically is 5%, and we'll come to that. I mean, imagine any other function in the business with a 5% efficiency rate, or for that matter, anything else. 5% success rate of operation, 5% success rate in flying, and so on. I mean, we wouldn't have ever continued with that. But somehow we tend to continue with that level of efficiency in sales. This is true, and this is not only in terms of sales. Your productivity loss because of interruptions, including that of sales, is a huge percentage. And as you know, if you get interrupted in a particular kind of work, it will take you about 15 minutes to get back into the groove when you go back to that again. This is, of course, a lot of this data is US data, because in most other markets this kind of data is not available. So this is one data point for small businesses in the US. It's a lot of money. Interruption selling is not working, and it's costing enterprises, on both sides, both the buyer and the seller side, huge amount of time and money. So how do we sort of transition from interruption selling? Seth Godin wrote the book Permission Marketing about 10 years back. So permission driven engagement is working. When a customer opts in, he will be more responsive to your messages, to your advances for any kind of engagement. But permission is the key. Here is one sample data which was part of the Gartner CSO update 2020. And again, we'll go into the details of which stage we are actually trying to engage with the prospect. It's very difficult for sellers to actually influence customer decisions. And by the time, as I said, by the time we have identified him or reached him, he has finished a big chunk of his buying journey, which is completely different from the selling journey that we have adopted. And at that point of time, we are basically in a red ocean scenario. We have 5 competitors, all of whom has identified the buyer right at the end, and we are looking at bloodbath. So this is something very important to understand, that by the time we have identified a prospect and gone through those various qualification uh, layers of MQL to SQL to qualified leads, we have reached here. So if we try to define what permission selling is about, permission selling is taking prior permission from the buyer to engage. And the signals were in the making for a while. HubSpot espoused the idea of inbound. They basically packaged that idea of inbound about 10 years back. And the concept was that you put out enough content in the adjacent spaces of where you are, and people who are looking for that will find you through that content, and they will come. And when they come, they're already going to express their intent to engage. Few years after that, account-based marketing came in, and we will talk about that in a bit, how complex the buyer's journey has become for him internally. And we are not privy to that. We are actually outsiders. We can never understand the specific politics or relationships going on in the buyer's environment. We'll never know that, but that's going on. That's real. And now you have also seen in the last 3 years the huge surge in product-led growth. And product-led growth is what? Where a user is using a product in its, the concept of freemium or try first, buy later, where you can go and experience a product and then buy it, which is pretty much what is buyer first about. That as a buyer, I go and engage with the product, I am investing my time, I'm showing my intent, and then I go and put my money behind that product. And even though the conversion rate is small, typically 15%, it is far more efficient than the salesperson trying to call and converting, because his conversion rate will become like 5%. Here, all 100, so to say, who come in and sign up is showing some amount of intent because they are investing their time. Permission selling is also about opt-in mails and newsletters. And this opt-in model is not just opt-in. It has many layers to it. It is opting in, it is opting on, it is opting when, it's opting where, opting how, and opting now. We'll discuss this later, but it is actually the whole expression of intent by the buyer when he says, okay, I'm opting in. It's a completely different mindset than getting bombarded with calls or mails. Rise of crowd review of peers is also an indicator of the initiative shifting to the buyer. A buyer, and I'll share some data in a bit, a buyer will trust peers more than advertisement or inputs from the seller. If we all look at our own buying behavior, whether it's at home or at work, we can pretty much say that if I'm going to buy a piece of equipment and I have a friend who has it, I will value that friend's inputs far higher than the salesperson in the shop floor. Permission selling is also sort of what happened in the old school model of Yellow Pages or Craigslist. The classified format had an element of permission linked to it. Conversational marketing, I already spoke about. It is sort of allowing buyers to insert themselves into the buying process and allowing the salesperson to insert themselves into the buyer's digital journey. And then, of course, any trade shows in a B2B scenario is also permission based selling, because if the buyer is coming there, he is giving you permission to engage. So this is some data I wanted to share. 59% of buyers prefer to do research online. This number varies, but it varies between this and 70%, which is the next number. Before, so there is this model of a 13-step decision-making process for B2B buyer, which is the buyer's internal journey. And by the time we actually get to engage with them, they're already in the 10th step. I mean, this is just one particular version I refer to. This is by Sharon De Morgan, but there are multiple such journeys. But you can see how complex that process is and how late into the process we get in. And as I mentioned earlier, the rise of peer review sites for all kinds of products and services, TripAdvisor, G2, Capterra, Yelp, both in the B2C and the B2B spaces, show that the initiative and the importance has shifted from what we as a seller can feed them and what the buyer is already finding and looking at. Ankita, would we like to check if anybody has any thoughts to share?
So far, Subhanjan. No questions. Audience,
Okay,
you can
okay,
ask questions anytime during the session. We would be catered to them after every few slides. So please just don't wait for the end of the presentation. Please ask questions.
So just to continue on, yes, sorry.
Yeah, let's move on.
Just to continue and to reiterate where this is all headed, is that we are talking about permission marketing, permission economy, and the buyer controlling the process. You can also think of it as trust economy. Trust with a buyer needs to be earned again and again. The new permission economy is all about opting in, and it's also about renewing that license to engage on a continuous basis. We cannot say because one of you have given us permission to engage, it's a permission in perpetuity. It's a permission which I can use to sell you or tell you whatever and whenever. It is not that at all. That brings me to the third point that I had mentioned about ethical analytics. The first, as I have mentioned, the first point to remember is that the buyer will control what information the seller gets to see, whether we like it or not. And if we sort of reflect on our own approach, I mean, there are a lot of talks about privacy violation and data collection. A lot of discussion goes on. I will talk about some specific instances which came out. All of you are aware of the Facebook Cambridge Analytica story, which sort of triggered the focus on this. But the fact is that the buyer is the owner of his own data, and it cannot be violated. That's a fundamental. We all talk about trust. I just touched upon that. We all talk about trust. Every single sales discussion that I have joined over the last 10, 15, 20 years, if you look at books, always a precondition of us being able to sell. We are talking of earning the buyer's trust, building a relationship. But relationships can't be built overnight. Trust can't be earned because I shared some interesting article with you. I cannot expect that you will start trusting me. You will not. Surreptitious tracking of data, of user behavior, will be a thing of the past. And as I mentioned, 99% of all tools do that, and they package that data and present it to the users, which means if I'm using a tool X, that tool is collecting data from my prospects without my prospects' explicit permission and showing it to me as intent data. And that's not going to work anymore, both from legal perspective and from this whole permission and trust thing that I spoke about, that buyers will stop engaging with companies which do not respect their privacy, do not respect their right to their data. I'm not even going to touch upon the state level, government level violations. We'll not go there today. But the fact is, people are far more aware and far more protective of their data. I mean, I don't want to talk about horror stories of what mobile companies, what uh, social networks, and nobody's out of this. Large companies, small companies, how much of your data is bought by third parties with whom you have no connection, how much of your data is traded. This is a huge number in terms of business. But I think we are coming to a stage where we'll be either prohibited or we'll face backlash from buyers, and we'll have to stop relying on those data. Yeah, I mean, there are typical data breach, the size. I was reading this cloud report of the state of the cloud by Bessemer Venture Partners, which came out a few weeks back, and they're talking of typical size of a data breach is $150 million. Worldwide, the data breach cost is going to be $2.1 trillion with a T. It is a concern at multiple levels, and I do not want to go into the technicalities of it or how you are going to protect it. All I am trying to say is that if we have to use data for the purpose of sales, we need to get that data through ethical analytics, which will be data collected through permission. And if there is no permission, there is no data. Yeah, I just touched upon this. Alex Ferreira, this report that I spoke about, Bessemer Venture Partners State of the Cloud report, they have an adjacent report around data privacy engineering roadmap. And one of the partners, Alex Ferreira, was quoted there saying, today there's not just a rift, but a chasm between where data privacy, technology, processes, and regulators should be and where they are, thus creating massive amounts of privacy debt. And that's the crux. You are aware of two of the very recent examples of privacy violations. One is by this very celebrated elite email service called Superhuman, and the latest is Zoom. You can just check out Superhuman and Zoom privacy, Zoom bombing, and you can see how Zoom, for example, was surpassing the internal security checks of a Mac and was directly opening up their app, which kept it vulnerable, and thousands of Zoom meetings were hijacked. Zoom also, without your permission, recorded every single call, captured uh, all collaterals shared in private conversations between two parties, and they were in their server, captured and recorded and kept. A lot of these calls were routed through China, where they were examined. We have no idea what actually happened, but Zoom, of course, moved very quickly. They closed certain things, they stopped certain things, they gave some disclaimers, they changed their privacy policy, and so on and so forth. Superhuman had the feature that it could tell you, they implanted some pixels in the emails that say I'm a user of Superhuman and I've sent a mail to Ankita. Ankita is not aware, but there is a pixel which alerts me as a part of the Superhuman's feature set that Ankita has opened my mail at this time and at this location. So they were tracking through that pixel where Ankita was. And so if Ankita happened to open my mail 3 times during the day, I could actually see that she opened the mail in the morning in New York, and in the evening she opened it in Boston, and in the night when she was looking at it, she was in San Francisco. So I was not only able to see that Ankita has opened my mail thrice, but I could actually see where all she was. And this was discovered by someone and written about, and then of course Rahul Vora, they moved very quickly, they changed certain things. But the point is, it is not fully gone though, uh, but the point is, what were we thinking when we thought that we could put in a pixel for ourselves which deeply violates the privacy and ownership of personal data of a user? We are familiar with the idea of technical debt when we consciously build products and we know that we are taking a shortcut because we have a deadline to meet and so on and so forth, and we know that we are going to have to come back and fix it later, and that results in major issues. That will be replaced now with what is being called the privacy debt. The core issue here is that who owns your data? And if this data is being collected with explicit consent, it remains to be discussed, debated, and the outcomes need to be protected. There is no two ways about it. So that brings me to the point of the session.
So
How do we
Manjan, we
sell to
have
the
few
new buyer?
questions.
Sure. Yes, please.
All right. One question is, what kind of articles do buyers prefer?
Oh, so if you're talking in terms of content marketing, it is not a question of what kind of, I mean, I do not understand fully in terms of what you mean by that, but I'm assuming that, are you talking about a long form content or a show? Because the topic will depend upon who are you selling to and what are you selling, right? Uh, so there are varied models of content uh, distribution. So the ideal way is, I can quote Gary Vee, if you're familiar with him. He has this concept called pillar content. So you have a topic, suppose you are in fintech and you are targeting bankers. So you'd create a pillar content, which will be like a long form, very in-depth report on a topic which is adjacent to where you are and where your target market is exploring to find data and information, and then repurpose this into multiple formats for distribution. So you create an infographic out of that, you create a 3-minute video or a series of videos out of that for YouTube, you create a tweet storm out of that, taking basic findings of the report and tweeting them. You create Instagrammable 1-minute video, audio content. So essentially, the idea is that you create a piece of content which is super valuable, and now convert it into multiple formats. So that's thought one. The other thought is, one of the best ways to figure out what your customer and the customer group wants is to actually talk to them. So one of the things that I do is I run a podcast, and I will have my target audience as guests in my podcast along with other experts. So it's not that I only talk to my customers, but I would have them as guests, and they will share what is bothering them at the moment. And that's a great way to figure out what your target market is looking for. Next, Ankita.
All right. Yeah, the next question is by Akshay. He's asking how to increase opt-in list for B2B various activities.
Yeah, see, so increasing is a process of doing a lot of things. So for example, all of you are here in this webinar because you opted to be here. What I'm trying to say is, Akshay, that you create opportunities and you ensure, see, everybody doesn't have a platform like NASSCOM. So NASSCOM can have 300-400 people signing up just because of NASSCOM brand and the trust in the brand. So if you are going to build a trustworthy brand, you have to give, and you have to give multiple times and create opportunities for people to actually come and opt into your system, and then build and reinforce that by asking permission. For example, I could, before I end the webinar, ask for your permission to send you some more data about what I just spoke. And maybe out of the 129 or 130 who are there now, 20 of you will give me the permission. So the point is, Akshay, that you have to do things where you give first and ask for permission. It is not enough to ask for forgiveness. I think that era is over. Just to connect the thoughts from the what we were talking in the past, that it is not enough to send it and say, oh, I'm sorry, I did it. That's not going to cut it, because that will seriously impact the trust that you're trying to build in the brand. So you have to create opportunities around your target audience and give them the option to opt in. And you have to ask them, it's not only opt in, as I was telling, opt on, opt when can I talk to you? You have to ask that. You cannot assume that you can talk to a person because he has opted in. Because he has opted in a form where you asked for his phone number does not mean that you can make a call. It only means that he has opted in. Now you have to take those multiple levels of permission, and trust me, as you continue to do that, and even if it is a slow process, you end up with a list of 1,000 people. These guys are going to engage with you, because without engagement there is no transaction.
All right. The next question is by Suresh. He's asking sales push to pull information model. Suresh, are you just asking a question or you're making a statement? All right, let's move on to the next question, Subhanjan. The
Yes.
next question is by Amit.
Hmm.
Conversational marketing is carried out with both bots on sites to an extent. Do you see bots owning end to end of conversational marketing?
That's a that's interesting question. Okay, first of all, we are in the early days of AI. We have seen some grand. I'm just moving away from the bot on the website, and I'll come back to that. All of us had seen that super impressive demo that uh, uh, Mr. Pillai had given when they were showing that Google Voice Assistant, where one AI voice actually set up an appointment with a real person. Uh, Sorry, Sundar Pichai. I'm sorry, not Pillai. Uh, so the thing is that we are really early in the AI game. Whatever you see as bots, they are not really AI bots. They are essentially a decision tree kind of. What you had as IVR is what is actually playing out right now in the bot scene, quote unquote bot scene. So to come to your question, I think we are far away from that position, and it's also about the complexity of the questions. So some things a human can interpret, it will take many years for a bot to understand. For example, as a human being, if I'm talking to 6 different people, I am in a position to sort of segregate those in buckets in my head and interpret them and also respond to each separately. I think we are far away. And again, see, it's very difficult to predict because the computational power has sort of grown exponentially today. So for me to tell that I don't see this happening in 10 years will be foolhardy. It might happen sometime in the future. It possibly is nearer than I think. But today we are far from it. Yes, Ankita.
All right. The next question is by Jayesh. He's saying, do you think that digital marketing is the future? And also, what can be the future assumptions?
Uh, See, digital marketing is the present, so it's not even the future. uh, I'm taking nothing away from mass media, but mass media is pretty much dead. Uh, you are watching most of your stuff on Netflix, and Netflix doesn't put any ad. If you're reading New York Times, and if you're a subscriber, that is, I mean, you are subscriber to say Times of India, it comes full of ads. If you're subscribing to New York Times, you will see lot less ads, uh, and there will be some ad-free versions as well. So, uh, so the point is that the traditional attention interruption model, which was the traditional advertising model, I think it's pretty much dead. Uh, as I said, nothing is absolute. So in some markets, like apparently in India, English newspaper readership is increasing. So go figure. But but fundamentally, if you look at your own consumption, for example, I don't have television at home. I don't subscribe to newspapers. My entire consumption is digital. I'm not saying everybody is like me. I'm just saying that the trend is towards that. The amount of content you are consuming on your phone uh, is is far more than it was 5 years back, simply because there are more ways of consuming it, more content is available, so on and so forth. So so first point, is digital marketing advertising the future? I think it is the present, it's not the future. It is already there, it's already here. However, what will change is what way. So what has happened is, if you remember, in the very early days of the internet, there used to be a site called Go Cities. What it used to do was it allowed you to create a single page for your business. It was sort of like a pamphlet. So the lot of the concepts of how we look at content and look at presentation of content is a direct legacy of what we have been doing offline, what we have been doing in television, what we have been doing in books, what we have been doing in magazines, and so on. The fact is, a new vocabulary is going to emerge, and permission sans interruption will be the center stage of that. So imagine when I allow you to market to me digitally, that's where the power is going to come out. If you are trying to interrupt me by pushing a digital ad, by pushing a pop-up, or by forcing me to sign a cookie set, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. There are many sites I've stopped going because they did not give me an option to opt out of cookies. And as I said, I'm not the example for everybody, but I can see the trend. Possibly most of us are doing that, who are conscious. I mean, there are still friends who tell me, hey, what privacy? I don't care. Oh, if FBI is looking at me or CBI is looking at me, I'll be very flattered. That's a very funny thing to say, because we really don't know the amount of violation that can happen. As I said, this discussion is not about privacy, so we'll not go there. But let's understand that when it comes to sales, digital marketing is the present, and digital marketing with permission is the future. Ankita?
All right, here's another question by Webhub, a little longer question. Do you think that the demand is shifting towards rural economy rather than urban because of some saturation? I want to ask how a business can crack the marketing and sales strategy for that, because in India it's a huge market, and what could be the sector that would be preferred in the countryside?
Yeah, okay. So there are multiple layers in this question, like you rightly said, Ankita. See, first thing is that I don't sort of subscribe to. Okay, so urban population in 2018 globally for the first time surpassed global rural population. It is not without reason that people are talking of building hundreds of cities. Of course, post-COVID, some of it might change. These are the black swan moments. We don't know. We have never predicted a scenario like this. So people may prefer to go back home and so on. Coming to the crux, I think different things will be sold to different people. So if I'm living in a city, say like Cambridge, I really don't need to buy a car. So it's not about whether we can sell cars to rural population or not. It's about the kind of lifestyle that we have in that place, and whether people will prefer cycle to a car, or in cities or in places where public transport is very good, people may completely abandon ownership of vehicles. I'm just giving an example. So there is no clear. I think comparing the markets is not an apple to apple comparison, and when it's not an apple to apple comparison, it's subjective. So it makes no sense trying to do that. As far as sectors, I think aspirational products, education, some bit of financial products. When I say aspirational products, I'm talking of food, I'm talking of entertainment, I'm talking of clothes, shoes, and so on. Then, as I said, education, it's a big aspirational thing, especially in India, and health and fintech. So these are all which has huge potential in the rural markets in India. Ankita?
All right, Subanjan, you want me to ask more questions or you want to move on to your next segment?
Depends. If there are a few, I can do it, or I can move on to the next segment. I mean, I'll leave it to you.
There are many questions.
Many questions. Okay, so why
Yeah,
don't I move on and then we can come back if that's okay?
sure.
Okay. Okay. So basically the premise that I touched upon earlier is that these three big shifts that are happening around interruption, around permission, around ethical analytics. So what is it? What is it that we are trying to say? How do we sell to this new buyer? So the core has to be to make buying easy. See, all the sales tech, all the training, all the books, all the podcasts around sales today talk about making selling easy. How can you be more successful in selling? But I think we have to completely flip that thought and talk of how can we make buying easy? Because you know what? Buying has become extremely complex. It is no more a single decision maker's domain. Stakeholders have a say in all decisions. The buyer system, the rules, criteria, history, relationships, politics is a complex and must be taken into account before anything is purchased. So if you look at, if you get into a glimpse of what's going on the buyer side, it's completely different from how we have learned to quote unquote create buyer persona and create a buyer's journey. It is as if it's a linear simple process. It is not. And I'll show you some data from Gartner about that. So this is what the same CSO report I referred to earlier. This is what it's telling. The B2B buying journey is hard. Gartner is talking about 6 to 10 decision makers, and they each are armed with 4 or 5 pieces of information. I don't know to read the slide. You can read it. But what I'm saying is there is no question that by the time a buying decision is taken, a lot of water has flown under the bridge. So what are these things that are stopping a buyer from buying? Let's see some data. First, it takes longer to purchase simply because so many people have to agree for a buying decision. And by the way, buying is never the first option. How does this, if you want to think about how this buying process works, somebody has an idea that something needs to change inside the organization. Something is not working, something is not functioning properly, something has to change. So somebody stands up and thinks, okay, I need to talk about this with my colleagues. That's where it starts. Not, and by the way, the first response to any buying sort of a scenario like this is, can we find a workaround and fix it? Can we do with what we have with us? Nobody willingly decides to buy something. A company which is going to buy a ERP software will possibly take 2 to 3 years before they reach that point where they say, okay, this financial year we need to budget it out. Like Gartner said, 6 to 10 decision makers. Typical company, 7 decision makers. This also, I'm sure, one more Gartner data, and longer sales cycles. We also have to understand that a buying decision is essentially a strategic decision for the buyer. The buyer is taking a strategic decision that we're going to invest money in some external thing because our internal resources and expertise and material and technology cannot solve that problem, and we need to make that strategic shift in thinking that we let something come in from outside. By the way, remember, it's a huge decision for the buyer, because something new getting introduced into their sort of a system in equilibrium can get completely disrupted. That's the biggest worry in a buyer's mind, that what will happen if I bring this in and it disrupts what I'm doing already. So it's a strategic decision. And unfortunately, our need and solution selling based approach is a tactical response to that. The buyer is trying to take a strategic decision and we are trying to play tactical. And that's why most of the time it is failing. 95% of the time it is failing. And the current need-based selling, believe it or not, was first articulated by Dale Carnegie in 1937. 1937, we are in 2020. It's nearly 100 years back. We are still playing by that. Need and solution selling. Identify need, sell solution. So going back to the Gartner report, this is what the buyer's process is. It is a multiple layer complex process. And this is not really happening in this neat little format that they're showing here. So this is the buyer's journey today, actually. If you try to create steps, it starts with an idea, like I mentioned earlier. Somebody thinks that something needs to change. Then it comes to something called assembly, where people get together, and this particular decision process that I'm talking of is mapped by Sharon Drew Morgan. There are other processes. I just find this convenient, so I'm using it. But it's pretty much this, right? So an idea. I have an idea. I call in my colleagues and call them, and I discuss, and then each of them will do their online research. Each of them will think, okay, we may need to include someone else. They will come up with possible fixes, fallouts, so on. Then it goes into a consideration stage, moves to organization stage, where the responsibilities are apportioned. Okay, you go and find out this, you go and negotiate that, so on and so forth. Then it comes to a change management stage, where the meeting is to discuss options and fallout and determine if more research is necessary, whether all appropriate people are involved, whether all the elements of the problem and solution are included. You see where I'm going with this? It is really very, very in-depth and difficult. And then eventually it will come to a choice stage where vendors will be called in. That will be the 10th step in a 13-step process. While we are trying to solve the strategic problem, which is the real solution that is required. By the way, the buyer is not buying your product or my product or my solution. The buyer is buying the outcome. You all know that. The buyer is buying the outcome that our product or service is going to give them. They're not buying our service. While that process is on, we have to solve their tactical problems which they're facing internally and externally, between us and internally with their team. Some of the problems and frictions that are there, like we demand synchronous time, right? We want a meeting. That's our first push. We want a meeting. Why has he got to meet us? What value have we communicated? Till then, what have we done? What has MQL, what are the parameters the marketing department has deployed to say it is a MQL and I'm pushing it to the inside sales team or to the sales team to do a sales qualified lead? What are the criteria of the sales qualified lead? And if you go back and ask these questions yourself, you will possibly see the fruitlessness of a lot of these exercises, and you'll also see most of them are driven so that end of the day we can say we have pushed 100 leads to the sales team this month. We have qualified them. How have you qualified them? Oh, they downloaded one white paper. Oh, they 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 came for a demo. How many people came for a demo? One person took a demo. Have they asked you some questions after that? No, but still they are qualified because they came to the demo. And now we are pushing them for synchronous time. Please give me a meeting, please give me a meeting, and so on. Then we are deluging them with information, but now there are huge amount of, again, as I said, I'm dealing with the tactical frictions. Sharing is a problem. I send you a mail, attachments don't reach because Gmail client is not going to allow anything beyond 25 MB. I need to then put it into a Google Drive or a Dropbox. Then there will be permission issues and so on and so forth. After I somehow manage to reach it to you, you now need to share my collaterals with your 7 colleagues. Remember the 6 to 7 people that are involved in the decision, and each one of you now have to manage my collaterals inside your system if you are the buyer. So these are all major issues, and I just now read those some of the steps that are going on at that point of time, the consideration, the meetings, the people, and so on, and you can imagine how we are actually layering up on that complexity for them. Getting buy-in from internal stakeholders is one of the early stages. Can we help them do that? How can we do that? If we can solve that problem, we are in early. We have a seat at the table of the discussion much earlier to when my competitor is going to come in, and that's when he's going to fight with 5 others, but I already know where this is going, right? Don't underestimate the complexity of multi-app communications that we are all engaging in currently. I send a mail with attachment, then I send a Google Drive link, then you open it, then you share it with your colleagues on mail. Then each one of you have questions which you will ask me, and suddenly my one mail thread has become 7 mail threads. Each one of us are going to keep track of 7 mail threads, and then some of us will talk on phone or on WhatsApp. You see where I'm going with this?
Subhanjan, sorry to interrupt. Actually, we are running like short of time because the session had to end at 3:30. So can we just wrap up in next five minutes or so? Because it
Yes.
was a 60-minute session.
Yes, sure. Okay, so this is a quick summary of the old and the new. The old was selling, the new is buying. It was face-to-face and physical, it's remote, through interruption, zero interruption, and so on. Old was vanity metrics, new is real intent. I could have gone into a bit about the vanity metrics, but I think let me go through the rest of the slides, which is not many, and we can then decide whether we can come back to this or not. So what do we do? What's next? We need to make it easy for the buyer by supplying information without expectation, helping them navigate and getting buy-in from their internal stakeholders like we just discussed, helping manage the complex process with the least amount of friction, right? We will have to rethink where we start the seller's journey. I think as sellers, we have to stop thinking about the buyer's journey because we have no control over that, but we need to rethink what will be our seller's journey. We'll have to rethink how we build and grow trust and relationships, because trust me, nobody is trusting us. And we'll have to rethink the tools we use to deliver extraordinary outcomes to our customers. In a buying, selling, value transaction process, for both parties is to come out with extraordinary outcome. That is the only goal. We have to ensure that our process, our tools, our behavior, our efforts is singularly focused on that. Yeah, thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer, since you already
Yeah, actually,
overshot the
so
time.
no problem. The audience, you can always reach out to Subhanjan on his LinkedIn for more communication and questions. And if you have any particular question and you're unable to reach out to him, you can mail me your questions. I will reach out to Subhanjan and probably I would be able to answer your specific query. And thank you, Subhanjan, for this great session. The pointers you shared were so relevant and significant for selling to a new buyer. Thank you so much for your time and efforts. And to all of you, I will meet you all on 12th of May with a great session from the product management series. To register and for more details, please visit nascom.in/events. Thank you, Subhanjan. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ankita. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you, guys.